for that.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our regular council meeting for Monday, January the 10th, our first meeting of the new year. So happy new year to everyone. Tonight's meeting is almost exclusively to deal with budget. It's an opportunity to provide a budget presentation to the public and to receive public comment or questions. So we'll get to that in due course, but with that, we'll call the meeting to order and begin with the playing of the national anthem. We would also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, including the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Chippewa, and the people of the Three Fires Confederacy. Members of council are reminded that they're required to declare any pecuniary interest that they may have in accordance with the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, and that such declarations should be made both verbally and in writing to be filed with the clerk. On to adoption of the minutes. Can I get a mover and seconder to approve the minutes from the December 20th, 2021 meeting? Councillor Buffett, seconded by Councillor Fegan. Any discussion on those minutes? All in favor? It's carried. On to public question period. Madam Clerk, were there any non-budget related questions submitted?
No questions this evening, Your Worship.
Okay. All right, so that takes us to the budget presentation. So what we'll do in a second here, I'll turn it over to our treasurer, Carrie, who will walk us through that presentation. After that, there will be an opportunity for members of the public. I think there are a few who have registered to sign on tonight, but there will certainly be an opportunity for those members to ask any questions or provide any comments that they have. And then a little further on into the agenda, an amended agenda was sent out earlier today, and there is an opportunity there for further budget discussion for council. So I think as far as any further council discussion or questions related to the budget, we'll wait until we get to that portion of the agenda. So with that, Carrie, I will turn it over to you and you can present the budget.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. Everyone can see that. Okay, can everyone see the presentation?
Yeah.
And everyone can hear me? Okay. So thank you. And Good evening, Your Worship, Council, and members of the public that are watching this presentation tonight. I know Council's heard this before, so I will try to go through this at a high level and keep the public up to date on the budget process. So tonight we have the public presentation that represents the fourth and final budget that this term of council will adopt. It also is the last opportunity for this term of council to support their own set of strategic priorities that were set back in the first year of this term of office. Staff have built this 2022 budget and presentation with a bright and positive outlook on the future of the town, and council's adoption of this budget will support their own vision of a community that is engaged, connected, and innovative. So we have quite a few slides to go through tonight, and I will try to keep the presentation at a high level with questions to follow. For members of the public that may not be aware, Council has already heard the consultation presentations of the Service Delivery Review, the Grace Tippling Hall Revitalization Study, and the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, which to date has focused on the future use of the Fiddle Park. And these all took place on November the 22nd, which is the reason for the delay in the budget process. Normally at this time of year, the budget would already have been adopted and the bylaw would have been passed. But here we are tonight on January the 10th. Council has already heard a budget framework report. We've had one special council meeting and one regular council meeting to deal with the budget. Many of the recommendations that did take place during the consultation presentations have helped to build this draft 2022 budget, as well as a 5-year long-term financial plan. So the annual expenses less the annual revenues are what provides the amount to be raised by taxation in any given calendar year. And for 2022, this amount is just over $8.6 million. On November 22nd, staff presented council with a budget framework report outlining certain features that would be proposed in the draft 2022 budget. A significant portion of the changes or new features were derived from the recent service delivery review, and which identified 4 themes and are itemized on this slide. Increasing resident expectations, service needs outpacing staff complement, aligning the organizational structure with emerging priorities, and to expand the use of data for informed decision-making. At the special budget framework meeting, council was kind enough to pass the recommended motion that was contained within the staff report. And the intent of that was that in order to allow staff to present the budget that they had built so that it could be presented as originally prepared, and allowing council to see the staff direction with respect to the increases. So at that point in time, the budget was presented with a tax levy not to exceed 13%. Since that time, there have been changes made to the draft budget at the special meeting of council. And at that meeting, a motion was passed asking staff to bring back a draft budget to the public that represented a tax rate increase of 5%. So the items that council decided to change within the budget document at that time were with respect to whether or not to hold in-person council meetings, the reduction of $85,000 from arts and culture, $5,000 from the DEI committee, cutting $6,000 from council conferences, and postponing the hiring of one of the positions that was identified through the SDR, as well as changing the amount that we would be utilizing from the tax stabilization reserve the total changes resulted in approximately $247,000 being cut, or approximately 3%. So before you is the year-over-year comparison of estimated revenues. And while the chart shows a 12.33% increase in revenues, the portion of that is related to taxation is 10.28%. Other own source revenues that are still suffering because of the lingering effects of the pandemic are such things as the provincial offenses fees, the bank interest, facility, and rental income. And for this reason, you will see a large decrease in 2022 reserves in order to accommodate for this shortfall in own source revenue. Sourcing and securing grant funding is still always a priority for staff. However, there are several projects within the 2022 draft budget that will not proceed unless funding is achieved through the grant process. So in keeping with a balanced budget, we also have before you an expenditure summary, which also indicates a 12.33% increase in total expenditures. And as identified in the budget framework report, the town is facing significant financial pressures and increased expenses in order to respond to the service and amenity expectations and the needs for a small town that continues to be experiencing significant growth. Coupled with unavoidable external cost drivers tied to inflation, legislation, stagnant assessment values, and the ongoing pandemic, it serves to leave little budget room in order to achieve what is expected. More specifically, this budget does include insurance premium increases, fuel and utility increases, CPI that are tied to existing contracts, vehicle and equipment cost increases, all related to growth. And you will notice from the explanation column that the majority of the increases in costs have been attributed to some of the new staff positions, staffing realignments, as well as weekend and evening coverage, all attributed to growth. And these were outlined in the budget framework report. The future implementation of projects and other enhanced recommended services are dependent on acquiring these staffing resources to carry them out. And council has recognized this need within the draft budget. Some other operational increases are related to weekend transit, as well as you will notice the OPP contract in 2021 was 10 months. And for 2022, of course, it is itemized for 12 months. And as already mentioned, we do have the increased staffing as some of the recreation amenities come online. We will become a 7-day-a-week operation. So on a positive note, because the town is still experiencing growth, and even though the phased-in assessment did not occur once again this year and will also not occur for 2023, the town did experience 5.3% taxable assessment growth. And that has allowed us to have a lower tax rate than would have been required should the growth have not occurred at all. So even though our levy increase is 10.3%, the tax rate increase is only 5%, which on a single average home assessment is approximately $124 per year or $10.36 per month. So an example of some of the residential homes around Shelburne, including some of the new subdivisions, as well as incorporating some of the older existing mature subdivisions. This slide represents approximately what those homes would incur if this budget was adopted as it is presented tonight. And as you can see, the percent increase is 5%. And that is due to the assessment remaining stagnant. Included in the SDR report, and also again in the budget framework report, we've outlined the current and proposed summary of staffing additions and changes. This chart does not include the staff that make up the Shelburne Arena, the Shelburne Fire Department, or the Shelburne Library. And this slide breaks down the staffing resource funding that it takes to run each department and excludes any benefits or payroll burden. And this slide sets out annually where your tax dollar goes. Other protective services includes bylaw enforcement, crossing guards, and conservation. Public works includes cemetery, waste management, and storm sewers. Planning and development includes the BIA and the EDC budget. Recreation and culture includes the town's share of the CDRC and the library, as well as heritage, local cultural grants, the Fiddle Park, and town events. We have several general capital projects in the budget identified for 2022. And these are utilizing funding sources such as the OCIF funding, the Connecting Link grant, and includes purchases of a pickup truck, a plow truck, as well as installing audible pedestrian crosswalks, at crossings. The Parks and Recreation budget is $1.1 million and includes the long anticipated amenities of a splash pad, a tennis and pickleball court, off-leash dog park, the Jack Downing Park revitalization, as well as some playground equipment and some equipment for Parks and Recreation. There are also some minor capital projects identified, such as the Besley Drain cleanout, some health and safety housekeeping issues within Town Hall, as well as a grant that is being applied for in order to be applied to some downtown beautification projects through the Economic Development Committee. As with any capital budget, the goal is to provide worthy projects that have been identified as shovel-ready and are therefore majorly funded through the buildup of reserves, donations, and development charges, in addition to any grants that may be available at the time. You will notice that out of the capital projects identified for 2022, only 5% is being funded from the tax base, or approximately $195,000. This slide shows the rate changes that will occur for both the water and sewer base rates, as well as metered rates in 2022. The rate study was done originally in 2017 and was updated again in 2020. It will be further updated in 2022 for 2023's rates and will include the additional costs reflective of the water tower, as well as the new updated estimates for the sewage treatment plant expansion. You will see in the 5-year capital plan how important it is and essential that collecting and building of reserves is with respect to future capital needs within the utility department, which is experiencing due to growth. For the water and sewer capital projects, we have approximately $2 million set aside for the design phase of the sewage treatment plant, as well as a $7.1 million project related to the second water storage tower, which is already underway. And you will notice there is a big crane up at that end of town, and that's what they're doing, is building the additional water tower. We also have $3.8 million in for the remediation for well 3 for arsenic. And we have applied for a grant for that project. And you will notice from this slide that long-term debt is identified as 36%, but will increase if the grant for well 3 is not received, as we will have to apply for long-term funding in order to complete that project. 10% is indicated to be coming from DCs, and the majority of that is for the water tower only, as a very small portion of well 3 is considered DC eligible. And this is a chart that is presented annually, which outlines the debentures that the town currently has. And one change on this slide for this year is that we have added the water storage tower, which we did acquire a $5 million loan for. We have not debentured that loan yet. So the principal and interest amounts that are identified here are estimates, as the interest rate will not be locked in until we do debenture. It is generally considered prudent to ensure that reserve balances at least equal our debt. And you will notice that at the end of 2022, our debt will be approximately $8.3 million. And from this slide, you will see that our reserves at the end of 2022 are just under $8 million. As noted in the budget framework report, there are significant reductions in reserves taking place in 2022. And staff have already indicated that 2023 is already shaping up to face similar financial demands. And it is important to note that these reserve balances shown here tonight do not include that of gas tax funding or the deferred revenue collected from development charges, which are legislated to be kept separately and are tied to further restrictions with respect to their permitted uses. Council was presented a 5-year capital plan on December the 13th as part of Council's strategic priorities. A stable long-term plan provides a bigger picture and changes decision-making from the short term to the long term. It also depicts how saving for the future now allows for priority setting, promotes tax rate stability, and provides for stable and affordable services. So the capital plan will come back to Council in early 2022 by staff in order for it to be adopted. And that is the end of my presentation for tonight. And I will turn it back. I will stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to Mayor Mills.
Great. Thanks, Carrie. So as Carrie mentioned, Council's been working its way through the draft budget since November 29th. We've had 3 separate meetings to kind of debate and discuss this, and ultimately what Carrie's presented tonight is the result of those discussions. As she mentioned, about 247,000, I think, was reduced from the original draft that was presented, which brings it down to the budget that you see tonight, which incorporates a tax rate increase of 5%. So with that, certainly there's an opportunity now for those members of the public who are signed on tonight to ask questions, offer comments. Council will take that information into consideration before finalizing the budget. Jennifer, I know that there's a few members of the public who registered early. I see a couple who are on here tonight. So
Yes, we have Randy Chambers and Len Gushardi who have registered. 2 other members did register, but they are not logged in.
on. Okay. All right. Well, good evening, gentlemen. Any questions or comments that we could field for you?
Randy, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I reviewed it. I don't have any questions.
Okay. Mayor Mills, Council, I want to thank Jennifer and Carrie for responding to my written questions that I submitted earlier on. I guess my only concern is that the extra costs that are incurred for an extra bylaw enforcement hire and the security firm that was hired to do parking enforcement. Were those anticipated costs, or were those kind of things that were like out of the blue? Oh, hey, all of a sudden there's a shortfall here between what the OPP covers and what we used to have. And were those like, was that a surprise, I guess, is the question.
I mean, for my part, Mr. Gushardi, it certainly didn't come as a surprise. I think the approach that we've taken in hiring a private security outfit to do some of the bylaw issues was only sort of a short-term mechanism. And it was always sort of seen that way. I think when the decision was made, one of the new positions that is actually accounted for in this budget is a second junior bylaw officer. And I, as I say, certainly for my part, as part of the transition to OPP, I think the expectation was there that, some of the bylaw stuff may fall more to bylaw department as opposed to police enforcement. That goes, I think, hand in hand with the expectation that we had when we decided to transition to the OPP, that, for those first couple of years, that there probably would be a slight uptick in terms of costs. But over the long run, those costs will be reduced, rather substantially. And that actually can be seen, in this budget when it's projected out to 2025, I believe. So if you look at that particular page of the budget, move out to 2025, you start to see some pretty hefty and anticipated savings.
Oh, okay. And like I said, I just wanted to thank Carrie for sending off what she'd sent off to me earlier, and for Jennifer for her follow-up as well. Yeah, that was the only question I had. Thank you.
That's it. Okay. Well, thanks, Len. Thanks, Randy, for signing in. I mean, we never expect huge crowds at public budget meetings, but it is nice to see that at least a few people are tuned in and engaged. It's certainly encouraging. So thanks for your interest. So with that, as I said, any further council discussion will hold off until we get to that item in the regular agenda. But at this point, can I just simply get a mover and seconder to receive the budget presentation that Carrie made? Moved by Councillor Hall, seconded by Councillor Bonato. All in favor? It's carried. Thanks, Carrie. Any council inquiries for this evening? Councillor Bonato.
I guess it's more for Jim. On Old Village Lane, there's a couple of utilities that are really tight together when the machine goes through to clean sidewalks, and they can get through if they hit the utilities, but they end up piling snow on the sidewalk, and they have to go around them. And at the end of the day, no one cleans that snow, and it gets piled up pretty high, and it's very difficult for people to walk over it. So I'm just wondering, I know if we can contact the utility companies, one, to move them. If they won't move them, if we can find some form of way of making sure that that spot gets cleaned up so that the sidewalk's at least passable.
Through your worship, I am familiar with the location that you're talking about. Normally our staff does go out and hand cleans that area, similar to what we do with some of the apron areas or with the sidewalks for crossing guards, that sort of thing. I will double check with them tomorrow. I can inquire with the utilities there. I believe it's Bell and Hydro, but I don't know how forthcoming they will be with wanting to move that. There would probably be a cost incurred with us, is what my historical experience has been there, but I can check into that, yes.
I guess the other alternative is to hit the damn things with the machines, and they'll come out and move them at some point in time when they get damaged enough times. It's just horrible that we even have to do that, and they're not willing to come out and move them when they know that they can be damaged. That was my only inquiry.
Okay. Councillor Wagner.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Mills. I guess this question would be directed also towards Jim. Just wondering, we haven't had a chance to discuss the Greenwood Hill and the I guess bales of hay that were lined up in order to sort of cordoned off an area. There was some talk on social media regarding it. So I just thought it might be a good idea for you to sort of explain the reasoning behind it, just so anyone in attendance tonight can understand why that has been chosen, to be that way.
Through your worship, we haven't set out Greenwood Park as an official toboggan hill by any means, but we know it is used. In that area at the bottom of the hill, there's a corrugated steel pipe that, unless it's delineated with some kind of marking, we did put a fence around it, that sort of thing. It is a potential hazard. Just as a further safeguard, then we went with the bales just to cushion anybody who might come into that area and to delineate where to stay away from, that sort of thing. So.
All right. Yes. Thank you very much. I mean, that's kind of what I assumed, but I thought it might be best for the community to hear straight from town staff as to their reasoning. A second quick question would be outdoor rinks. Have they been installed at all and their locations? And are we working towards maintaining them so that they're available now that the CDRC has to have the temporary closure?
Yes, through your worship, we finally do have the weather, the conditions that we could get going on the rinks. So they have been working on KTH as well as Greenwood. Greenwood is in very good shape so far, from what I understand today. KTH is a little bit behind that. That's just because we have a concrete pad at Greenwood, which transmits the cold weather a little bit better for the freezing. So yes, they're underway now and they should be open shortly.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all your hard work, guys.
Good. Okay. Anybody else? No. Okay. On to items for discussion then. So the first one is any further council discussion with respect to the 2022 budget. Deputy Mayor Anderson.
Thank you. There was a question raised by myself with respect to the cost of snow removal for the stop located in Orangeville. And I know that we received a response that addressed that issue amongst council members, but for the benefit of the public, because it was a question that was raised in a public meeting, if I could have staff maybe just comment on the finding of whether or not we are responsible and the costs that were associated with that.
Denise.
Through the mayor, I did follow up. Thank you for your question. We did confirm that the cost for the snow removal is approximately $1,000, that those costs are being covered by Grey County as part of their transit service. The amount that I had included was based on the original clearing for maintenance when we were going to have 2 transit shelters within the town of Shelburne. So that was an overstatement of the amount at $8,000. And the town of Shelburne, similar to what we've done in the past, the 4 locations that we have on the road are incorporated in our standard winter maintenance. There's no real additional cost to deal with those on-road sites. So the adjustment will be made at the next reiteration of this budget, where we've suggested that the amount that's being transferred from the tax stabilization reserve can be reduced by the amount of $8,000.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. No, I know in Carrie's presentation that the anticipation was that the council would pass a resolution at our next meeting, January 24th, I believe it is, essentially asking and instructing staff to come back with a bylaw, which we could then pass and formally adopt the budget. But if we're ready to go, unless there's some objection, I don't see why we don't go ahead and pass that resolution tonight, and then staff can bring back the bylaw at the next meeting. Does anybody have any issues with that? Okay. If not, then I will ask for a motion. Be it resolved that the Director of Financial Services Treasurer be directed to bring forward a bylaw to adopt the 2022 municipal budget as amended through presentations, discussions, and deliberations held November 29th, December 13th, and December 20th, 2021, and January 10th, 2022. I get a mover and seconder for that. Councillor Fegan, seconded by Councillor Hall. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried. Okay. You're okay with that then, Carrie?
Yes, thank you very much.
Make up some of the lost time. All right, next is a report as well from Carrie, and that's just the annual borrowing bylaw. It's basically just housekeeping stuff, but do you want to speak to that at all, Carrie?
I can. The only thing that's changed from last year is the percentage that represents the amount that we are eligible to borrow. It has increased because the budget has increased. But other than that, it's not something that we utilize. It's just a requirement under the Municipal Act and is there in case we do need it for some unforeseen reason.
Any questions for Carrie on that? Okay. So I do have a motion. Be it resolved, the council receives staff report FS 2022-01 with respect to the annual borrowing bylaw, and that leave be given for the reading and enacting a bylaw number 1-2022, being a bylaw to authorize the borrowing of $9,655,515. Moved by Councillor Bernardo, second by Councillor Buffett. All in favor? Carried. Okay. Notices of motion for this evening. I know Councillor Wagner has one. So Councillor Wagner, if you'd like to read that notice of motion into the record.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Mills. Okay, so whereas with the rising numbers of COVID positive cases across both the province and country and the increased demand requirement for antigen testing to safely return to the workforce regardless of vaccination status, and whereas to provide to the citizens the understanding that their government is working for their health and not profits by assisting citizens that do not have access to employment provided tests or the privilege of paid sick days, while complying with recommendations to quarantine upon symptoms and or positive test results, thus not receiving income for quarantine periods and paying for antigen testing to return to work would create further financial hardship. Be it resolved that Shelburne Town Council calls on the provincial and federal government to work together to implement a universal rapid antigen test cost for the retail sector, both province and nationwide, and that this cost reflect the current economic state and be as cost efficient as possible so that profits are not made off the health of Canadian citizens, and that this be implemented immediately to lessen the financial burden of acquiring rapid antigen tests, and that staff be directed to forward a copy of this resolution to all Ontario municipalities, Wellington, Dufferin, Guelph Public Health, the Minister of Health, Christine Elliott, Dufferin MPP, Sylvia Jones, Dufferin MP, Kyle Seaback, Premier Doug Ford, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
Okay, so that motion will be placed on the agenda for the next meeting and considered then. Any other notices of motion? No. Okay. On to communications. Were there any items listed under communications that anybody wants to deal with separately? No. Okay. If not, can I get a motion then to receive those items for information? Moved by Councillor Wagner, seconded by Councillor Bernardo. All in favor? Carried. No closed session. I get a mover and seconder for the confirming bylaw. Councillor Hall, seconded by Councillor Bernardo. All in favor? Carried. And a motion to adjourn. Councillor Buffett, seconded by Deputy Mayor Anderson. All in favor? Carried. All right. Well, thank you all. Thanks again to those members of the public who came out, and we'll see